It is interesting, but not exactly for the reason you might think. Is what happens is when this is just a whole number, when it goes through one cycle, it just loops back in on itself. When it's not a whole number, like if it's divided by 2, it takes 2 whole cycles to loop back in on itself. And then when it's divided by 3, it takes 3 cycles, and so on. So if you're following, you might see that when it's an irrational number, like pi, what happens is that's not any way a fraction. So it's really actually never going to loop back in on itself. So you see here, it's never repeating. It's making this nice pattern. And now it sort of looks like it's looping in on itself. But if you look closely, you can see it's not. The lines are just really close together. So it is interesting because it never loops back in on itself. But what's even more interesting, because you see it almost does. It gets really close and it creates some sort of pattern. But if we did something like the most irrational number, the golden ratio, you can see that it really comes quite far off from looping in on itself. And it doesn't even create too much of a pattern. You look at some numbers that are less irrational, and they still create some pattern. But this one, the least rational number, really doesn't create a pattern. And you can see that because if you just let it go forever, it really doesn't overlap. And it just ends up looking like it's covering the whole area. It's still, of course, not. There's still gaps. But it looks like it's covering the whole area because it doesn't even come close to overlapping in on itself. Unlike pi.